Hello, everyone. Huge thank you for joining us today for this discussion on weighing up the pros and cons of build versus buy. This is a lead dev webinar created in partnership with the good people at Launch Darkly. So you all know the video stream should last about 45 minutes, after which both myself and the panelists will be heading to the lead dev Slack channel. And if you have questions that come up and you'd like to chat about them with us, we will be answering your questions in the building software channel over there. So you're encouraged to come over and join us afterwards if you want to know more. Just some home set up at the beginning of this. We want to make sure that we cover the topics that are of interest to you. And so we will try to make some time towards the end of this panel to answer questions live. So if you do have some questions and you'd like to submit them, there is the Q&A feature in Zoom. So go in there, ask your question, and then we will try to get through as many of those as possible towards the end of the session. But yeah, let's get started. Introductions. My name is Rod, and I will be the moderator today. And I'm joined by Andrea, Dan, Omar, and Sangeeta, who will be sharing their experiences and insights. So why don't we start off with asking each of our panelists to introduce themselves. We'll go around one by one, and ideally, if you can give us your name, tell us where you are in the world, and then maybe share a little about your background. And why don't we start with you, Andrea?
Sure, yeah, thanks. Hello, everyone. My name is Andrea Heyman. I am a staff software engineer working at Etsy, located in New York City currently. At Etsy, I work on our machine learning systems that power our advertising product. I recently led my team through a big overhaul of those systems away from an in-house platform and towards a third-party system. So I'm really excited today to share our learnings from that experience.
Great. And then we have Dan Blundell here. Dan, can you say hello?
Thanks. Well, hi, everyone. I'm Dan Blundell. I'm working at Gymshark as head of core engineering. I'm based in the Midlands, not too far from our HQ in Solihull. And we spend most of our time kind of working on the data backbone that sort of powers everything at Gymshark around our community. So everything from our e-commerce to training app and beyond. So our ever-growing tech team is doing amazing work there.
Great. And then Omar, say hello and tell us about yourself.
Hello, everyone. Happy to be here. Name is Omar Kankovo, and I'm currently located in Chicago. I run the digital and e-commerce technologies for Ulta Beauty, also located here in Chicago. Looking forward to exchange of everyone here today.
Great. And then last but not least, Sangeeta.
Hi, everyone. Sangeeta Narayanan, Director of Engineering at Netflix. I lead a team that provides foundational infrastructural pieces and tools for the content creation side of Netflix, which is something, as you all might know, we've started to make a big push towards over the last few years. I am based in Los Gatos, well, San Jose, California, close to the Netflix offices.
Terrific. So why don't we dive in? So the context for this discussion is that when you work in a company that has an engineering team, there are times when you need software built, and the question comes off of, should we build it ourselves or should we buy a solution from another vendor? The challenge is that there are costs, both obvious ones and subtle ones, with either choice. So our goal today is that the panel will share their experiences with you so that you can all be more prepared the next time you need to make that kind of a decision. So let's kick things off. And I thought it would be nice to ask the same question of everyone, go around the circle. And so I was wanting to know, suppose another engineering leader, maybe someone at your company, somewhere else, but someone comes to you and says they need your advice on a decision about buying versus building some software. What would be the first question you would ask them? So Andrea, why don't we start off with you?
Sure, yeah, that's a great question. So I think the first question I would ask this person who's just starting the decision-making process for build versus buy is to ask them to kind of take a step back from the offerings that they might be considering and the build versus buy question, and just think about kind of what does their dream piece of software look like if they were to go to the whiteboard and sketch out their perfect system, regardless of what offerings they know are out there. What does it look like? What properties does it have? If they're looking to replace something that's currently part of their system, what are the points of friction? What are they hoping to address? Or if it's something brand new, what are the must-have features? And I think going through this exercise can be really helpful for later on, prioritizing what criteria do you really value, and then can shed a lot of light on the ultimate decision that you have to make when you have this idea of, okay, what do I truly want, taking away the realities of the world for a minute.
Cool. And Dan, same question to you. What would you ask this theoretical leader?
Generally, it's kind of the back to basics question of like, what problem are we solving? So irrespective of what we do, whether we're building something by, what problem are we solving, and can we articulate that, and can we articulate the kind of implications of that, and can we then understand the sort of cascading effect of that change? Because irrespective of what the change actually is, we need to know what problem we're solving or what opportunity we're grabbing, and kind of what sort of the cascading decision-making process is from there for me.
Great. Omar, so yeah, for you, someone came to you and said, I'm thinking buy versus build. What would you want to know to be able to help them?
Yeah, I think my very first question goes to exactly what Dan said. So what are the challenges we're trying to solve here? And what is the targeted audience that we're looking at? So, based on those answers, because you could have, different ways of solving a problem, right? So it's all about, what is the problem at hand, and basically what's the scope of that problem, right? So if it's just a handful of folks and, really minimum customization needed, you could just, grab something off the shelf. But then if, you're trying to solve a big problem and need to fit into the enterprise thinking and culture, then you may have to do a lot more changes than you would from a system off the shelf. So then that might lend to building from scratch. So it's always going to depend on what you're trying to solve over time.
Yeah, definitely. And then Sangeeta, why don't you finish this off? What are you asking of our theoretical leader?
Sure, I think the back to basics, what's the problem is a good one, but just to add something to the conversation, I would ask sort of what's the strategic value of whatever it is that you're considering and to your business, right? How does it impact the business? So as a very simple, naive example, email, you're not going to go build your own mail server. So likewise, I think it's worth looking at if there's value in maybe it's competitive advantage or whatever it is, then yes, you'd consider it. But so that's the lens I would use.
And I think, yeah, that sort of leads into, the first question here is there such a thing as a clear-cut, oh, this is clearly buy versus build? What are the signals you would look for? And that's maybe, Sangeeta, maybe you want to take that first. What are some things you look at that would say, yes, you should buy that versus no, you should build that?
Yeah, my experience, unfortunately, like most things in life, it's never a clear yes or no. There's so much context, and it's really context is everything. So in terms of what I would look at, like I said, what's the problem we're trying to solve? What's the strategic importance? I think there's a time horizon thing. Often you look at sort of upfront costs, and you might skew one way, but longer over a multi-year time horizon, what does that look like? That's another thing. The other point is, I'm a big believer in stick to your mission. Anything that's not core to what's delivering business value, minimize your spent on that. So you viewing it from that perspective. The other thing I'll touch upon is culture. Is what is the engineering culture that you've established? Is that, and not that that's should dictate the decision necessarily, but I think it definitely should be something you consider, because if you make a decision one way or another, how are you going to bring the org along? And then likewise for the stakeholders. So those are some of the things I would consider.
Sure, yeah. Anyone else have anything to add on there about what might make this decision easier?
I think sometimes it's also the, you have a, is it a solved problem? So sometimes like we have like on a, for much, particularly when I've worked in kind of smaller organizations as well, when you maybe don't have as much engineering capability, I think Sangeeta's like point, like, is it core to your mission? Like you can only do so much in a day, in a week, in a month, in a year. Like there's only so many engineering hours you have to focus on leading teams through those kinds of changes. So is the thing we're doing, back to the strategic point, right? Like, is it a solved problem? And is it core to our mission? So there's this whole kind of trade-offs process of like, what are we capable of? What are the capabilities we have as an organization? And do they line up with what we should be spending our time doing? And does it have strategic value to us on the horizons for like 3 months, 6 months, 3 years, 5 years down the line? And the choice we make today might be fine for today, but that might just set another path to say, actually, we need to start a kind of migration process almost at the same time to say we need to solve this problem now and ultimately build a path towards going the other way further down the line.
Yeah. Omar, were you going to add something there?
Yeah, I realize that all the time Dan is always stealing my thunder. So Dan, watch out.
Yep.
You got me.
Yeah, so
you got me.
yeah, but it was going around the same lines anyway. So exactly, yeah. So what are you solving? Is it aligned with your strategic imperatives, right? So what's the ROI in that? Just as Dan was talking about, it is not just what you need right now, but you need to look at the long term, right? So am I building this to solve a problem right now, or this is going to be around for the long term? And then when you're looking at that, then what's your total cost of ownership? You need to factor all those into that. And basically, what's your budget right now, right? For a small company would be, in the same situation as a big company. So,
yeah. And cost, I think that's maybe an interesting thing to maybe focus on, is that at the start of a project, a vendor might come to you with an actual, here's the dollar bill number of dollars this will cost you. And that seems like, okay, that's what we're weighing up against engineering salaries. I was then wondering, maybe Andrea, if you'd like to talk to this, how do you think about those costs, and how do you evaluate, the total cost of a bought or a built solution?
Yeah, I think this is a really, really challenging question, because the costs that you're considering are not necessarily all available to you upfront. Obviously, the engineering effort from your internal resources is a difficult thing to measure, and it's hard to know exactly what the level of investment will be. Similarly, when you're buying a third-party solution, you might get some kind of price tag up front, but those costs might be contingent on usage and something you're not even able to fully estimate until after the system is fully built. And so from our experience, I think we definitely found ourselves in a situation of having unexpected costs come up. And I think a few strategies that we took into account early on in the planning process was, when considering a third-party solution in particular, is to get to an end-to-end prototype as quickly as possible in your development cycle, so that you're really able to load and stress test the system and end up with a really clear picture of what the costs are going to look like when the system is fully integrated, receiving production traffic. So that's something really important to keep in mind from an engineering perspective. I think another kind of hidden cost that doesn't always come to light is with a third-party solution. You might assume that the ongoing engineering effort on your part is lesser compared to that of an in-house solution. But I think it's important to keep in mind that there is an ongoing maintenance burden there as well when you're having to respond to upgrades or a schedule that is outside of your control, or if an issue comes up with that software that you're then blocked on perhaps an external party and addressing, that can kind of incur cost as well. That's really difficult to measure. So I think it's a hard question, and kind of the best thing you can do is try and uncover a lot of those hidden costs as early as possible in the development process.
Sorry, I managed to mute and unmute myself simultaneously there. That was confusing. No, I think that's really helpful. Sangeeta, do you have anything to add there to thinking about the cost of different options?
Yeah, for the vendors, well, the one thing that comes to mind is there's the sheer sort of dollar cost or euro cost, and then there's the there are these other factors, some of which I think have come up earlier, but in either case, right? So there's the ongoing maintenance, there's how big, if it's an open source or even a vendor software, how big is the community? What's the talent pool out there, right? So sort of modeling out those scenarios. And one thing and this is not specific to this topic per se, is this idea of sort of when it's unknown, we're always having to make decisions in the face of ambiguity or not having complete all the facts, or they're evolving, right? So constantly sort of adjusting. I think we often tend to think of decisions as like, and some of these big ones are, right? Sure, it's A or B, or 0 or 100. Well, what can we do to maybe move in degrees of 10, right? If maybe that's an abstraction layer that allows you to swap things out. So then you add a cost. There may be an upfront cost to engineering your system in that way, but in the long run, it gives you more flexibility. So I would say thinking of cost. And then on the buy side, there's the opportunity, or rather the build side, there's the opportunity cost. So, what are you not doing? So those are some thoughts that come to mind.
Definitely, yes. If your engineers are doing this, they're not doing something else. How are you making sure they're making the right choice? Another thing that I think comes up with evaluating costs is, the logical fallacy of sunk cost. That once you've made a decision and you've invested time in it, you have to carry on with that. I was wondering, do any of you have examples of ways to break through that kind of thinking, ways you've been successful with that?
I've got one where I wasn't successful.
That's a good start.
Like previous life, very big project to do typical like ERP migration, kind of ridiculous kind of investment upfront, kind of real commitment where everyone absolutely knew what the requirements are before we started. They definitely didn't. So this was past career, a few roles back, and there was kind of an investment. This was pre-Gymshark. It was investment in this ERP migration, and I'm sure we got, I think it was a 2.5 year project, ERP for multiple organizations, and the investment was millions, and it kept stacking up, and we got, I think it was six to 8 months in, and we kind of flagged numerous times that actually like it wasn't really looking in the early stages of rollout of different modules and different pieces of functionality and processes, that really wasn't actually looking like that we were getting supported the way we were expected to. We weren't kind of getting the speed and the momentum that we were expecting to get out of this rollout, and it's going to take longer and all these kinds of things. And numerous times we kind of flagged these parts of it, and it was kind of, I think it flagged something around internal process and having your internal processes being accountable to yourselves and being like really understanding what your measures of success are up front, and actually trying to bring some of that iterative agile practice to even implementations of systems, to being and even through procurement as well. So when you're going out and talking to vendors, or like really understanding what the change is that you're trying to make, really understanding, I think is Andrew sort of said, like, how do you get the smallest version of the thing out there, even if you're buying a thing? We weren't successful because, again, it was like, well, we've come this far, everyone's organized around like doing this thing, therefore we're expecting to do this thing. And there was this kind of invisible person who would be massively upset if we didn't follow through with all this stuff. And it's kind of breaking down that cultural aspect as well, of acknowledging that actually the cost of acknowledging this is a problem now and finding a different course of action will actually be a more respectful, culturally safer and more sensible course of action. Not just the financial part or the kind of operational impact, but actually the cultural impact of saying it's fine to fail and keep going along the same path seems a bit mad. And it's that process, I think, more acknowledging the learning and making a big cultural statement that says we need to accept that this is sunk cost, but there's no benefit in continuing down that path, not really. And having the internal process, feedback loop and accountability to go, we got something wrong here, how do we deal with it? And how do we learn from that to do better with whatever path we take in the future?
Yeah. One thing that you mentioned there is like just, you know, vendors is a big part of a buy decision, comparing different vendors. What are some tips that you have for how do you evaluate if a vendor is, I think cultural is a good word, we've been using that. How do you know if like using a vendor is going to be a good cultural fit and a good long-term fit for your organization?
I can jump into that one.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's actually a great question. It requires obviously some kind of studies. And so your very first thing you need to look into is to see if you have the technical know-how in-house, right, to handle that, right? Whether, you know, and you know, I think Sangeeta was sharing about opportunity cost, right? So that's also one thing that you could look into, where maybe a partner can come in and help you instrument that what you leverage in your internal resources on, you know, other more strategic and imperative focused stuff, right? Not that this project is not, but essentially you're looking first, you know, budget, of course, as we talked about, right? And then also the technical know-how in-house. If you do have it and you want to use that, or want to bring in somebody else from a vendor as to free up your internal resources, focusing on more other imperative strategic stuff. So those would be some of the things to definitely consider as you look into whether you're bringing in a partner or not.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And then, yeah, as well, when evaluating a vendor, it's not just the solution they have today. You have things like, you know, future roadmaps and support and things like that. Maybe, Sangeeta, have you thought about how to evaluate how the partnership with a vendor, how to evaluate that up front?
Yeah, in fact, it sort of ties into the previous question on the vendor culture. For me, or if what if you ask me this, what would I say? And what I would say is that the collaboration and the partnership, sure, at the end of the day, there's money exchanging hands and we're all in there. You know, these are for-profit businesses. However, I think for me, sort of their approach to taking customer input, how open they are to or what's my ability as a customer to influence their roadmap, and what does that partnership look like, is something I value highly. And speaking of culture, if I may, we once had an experience, one of my teams, where a famous company, we were using their software and running into challenges. And the engineers, and up to a certain level, they were very keen to, because it was hard for them to reproduce the it wasn't just a specific problem, trying to get a better understanding. So the engineers were very keen to come up with an engagement model where they could sit with us, learn more and all of that, but it just reached a certain level and somebody put the kibosh on it, and it kept happening, right? And so I'm sure for good reasons that weren't visible to us. So but that doesn't sort of give us a ton of confidence that that's one thing. So in terms of support, how open, what's their strategy, having clear visibility into their strategy, how much input will we have up front, and how flexible are they? Some things to consider there.
Dan, do you have any thoughts on that question?
I think it's so much about the relationship. I think Sangeeta said there, like, yes, there's money changing hands, but so much when interacting with vendors, it's from my experience has been the best relationships have the ones that have really sustained contracts the longest as well. Where it's a two-way relationship as well. Whilst you might be a customer and a supplier in that sort of sense, there is also an element of back and forth, because there are trade-offs and compromises even when you've got a sort of contractual relationship with someone. You know that any given vendor isn't going to give you the earth, because they've got money to make and they've got their kind of own roadmap and priorities, and you're probably not their own customer, you would hope. But I think it's that fostering, if you've got values as a brand, as a company, and making sure that they sit really well with those values and represent the same sort of things under times of trouble and stress in their own world. How do they respond? And looking at the kind of situations or incidents they've had in the past and how open. I think there's a few incidents in the past. There's been some really good examples from various other companies who have been really open. I think Cloudflare's recent security, they did a really great write-up on some of the security things, problems they'd had with camera compromise at some of their sites. These kinds of things where you start to look at different brands and how they work with you, or how they demonstrate their history of different situations and how well they represent their own values, gives you a good representation. I think certainly a good kind of litmus test on how well they're going to deal with their own customers and stuff as well.
Yeah. So one challenge that can come up, especially, you're managing a team of software engineers, and engineers like to build things. And so sometimes when the suggestion of buying a solution comes in, there can be, internal reluctance. It can be, sometimes called, not invented here syndrome, but the sort of engineering tendency to want to build things themselves rather than buy a solution. And that can come either from engineers or from stakeholders at the company. So I was wondering, maybe Andrea, how do you overcome that kind of internal reluctance to bringing in a package solution?
Sure, yeah. As an engineer, I can definitely relate to that perspective of that internal reluctance, but I'll also say that, on the flip side, as an engineer, there are a lot of benefits from being able to offload some of the, pieces of the platform to a third party, so that you can then exercise your own expertise to build on top of that. We've certainly seen that in the machine learning platform that my team has adopted at Etsy. By adopting a third-party platform, we've really been able to hone our expertise as data scientists and machine learning engineers, and see our velocity just skyrocket by being able to have a platform that meets our needs, allows for flexibility and a high iteration speed. And so I think that's something that folks don't necessarily consider. And so I think the question I'd ask is, what for your engineers, what skills or opportunities does this unlock for them, by being able to focus on other things, hone their own technical expertise in a new area, as well as kind of deliver the competitive advantage that you get by being able to focus on something that's a little bit more niche and targeted.
Mm-hmm. Omar, I'm seeing you nodding along. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think, Andrea actually nailed it right there. So, and, you do see that almost, I mean, even personally, I actually, in actually town hall with my CIO, I even had to ask that question. I'm one of those folks that believe in, building everything myself. So I have control over it, and I know, how we integrate and work. But sometimes, as Sangeeta was sharing, I wouldn't basically just get up and try to build my own Outlook system, right? Just to handle mails internally. That wouldn't be, a wise approach of doing things. But it all comes into, how you lay it out to the business partners or the other side to show, you're basically what could you just bring in off the shelf so your team can focus to other things, right? So sharing those and showing the cost and being able to basically just lay it out in detail so they understand. That's actually the best approach to come up with getting alignment.
Great. And yeah, I think building on top of that, then one of the things that can come up is when you already have an existing solution, moving from building to a bot, or an in-house solution to a purchase one, or vice versa. And I was actually wondering, do you have any examples of like being deliberate about that up front? Is building now, but we're going to buy later, or vice versa? Has anyone seen that be a successful approach? And when might that be appropriate? Maybe Dan.
Yeah, I've seen both work, kind of whether you build something first and buy it later, or vice versa. And I think, again, going back to some of the more strategic elements around kind of what's your long-term plan, but also looking at what your own internal capabilities are as a brand, as an organization. Like, what can we do now and where do we expect to be in the future? So there's been instances where in sort of almost all roles previously where I've been part of teams bringing in sort of bought software because we don't have the capability right now, but we know that we might later. I think it's a really good opportunity as well to kind of prototype out, but with a vendor bought, like established potentially like market product, to go, yes, it does all these things, but we maybe only need it for, say, this use case. And you kind of get the benefit of the velocity and time, effectively time to market for yourselves, where you've got this kind of feature-rich vendor products that may solve your problem now, prototype that out, and then in the future, then start to migrate to just building out maybe just that portion of feature functionality, because like, do you know what, 80% of this product we don't actually need, we don't use, and when we've thrown it out into the wild in the organization, we don't actually have use cases for this. And I think sometimes the use cases, especially when you're going out to market, can be like, oh, we'll use it for everything. And actually, in reality, you start to narrow down on maybe 2-3 different use cases, and you can start that process sort of away from that, or to start realizing where there's gaps as well. Is that very often you have conversations with vendors. Yes, we'll solve all your problems, and a majority of them are very good. But I'm sure we've all had experiences where there's been like, yes, it does all the things. And then you get down to it and you go, it maybe doesn't do all the things, certainly not all the things we maybe want it to. And you start building around the edge anyway. And I think there's some good signals there to say, well, if I'm building quite a lot around the edge of this thing, then actually maybe this thing isn't as valuable as we initially thought it was. And actually maybe there's some considerations we need to make there.
Yeah. Sangeeta, do you have anything to add there?
Yes, I do. I think, let's see, a couple of thoughts. You asked, well, have you had an experience where you've known upfront that you're going to swap things out? And I would say, in general, I like to approach every decision as something that we will revisit at some point. Not just say you're questioning it all the time. However, status quo is also a decision, right? And so, so that's that. Now, one thing that's helpful would be to think about, well, what are some things that might cause us to revisit this? Thinking of that upfront would be helpful. I've seen that. And then there's the sort of time horizon, right? So when an industry is in its infancy or a problem space, you don't have enough established vendors out there or solutions out there that do exactly what you need, because it's still, everyone's trying to figure out product market fit. And so at that point, it might make sense for you to build. And certainly at Netflix, we've done a lot of that in the early days of the cloud, but knowing fully well, AWS is going to come build it, and we're not here to compete with AWS. We want them to do the heavy lifting. That said, we've still built some software up front. But in that case, it goes back to, all right, at what point do we say, It's served its purpose. Now we have something bigger, better that's supported by this behemoth. Why do we want to do it? So
yeah, cool. All right, we have about 10 minutes left. So just a reminder to our audience, if you have any questions that you would like the panel to answer, please use the Q&A button on the Zoom call and put your questions in there. But before we dive into those, let's see. Oh yeah, so another thing as well, we talk about build versus buy. Buying implies, okay, we're paying money and getting the solution from a company, but there's also the option of open source code, where maybe you're not writing a check for it, but you are getting an existing solution. And so how do you, where does this fit into buy versus build discussions? Maybe Omar, do you have any thoughts on how that features?
This may need some time to digest that and think through it.
No problem.
I went through some experiences, but give me a moment to. Yeah.
Sure. We'll come back.
Yeah.
So then, Andrea.
Yeah, I think of open source in some way as sitting somewhere in between the build versus buy spectrum, and that as you said, there's no upfront cost. You're not the party who's ultimately building the piece of software, but the level of support you can expect as a trade-off is less than with a fully supported bot solution, and you might have some engineering investment that you would have to make yourself in order to add new features or change functionality. So that's kind of where I think of it. I think when evaluating an open source solution, some of the questions that I would ask are, what does the support community look like for this product? What does, if I discover a bug, will I get support in changing it, or will I have to change it myself? If I want to add a new feature, who approves the pull requests? What time frame can I expect in order to get that change fully merged, or am I going to have to end up forking the solution and essentially bringing it in-house? So I think it's really important to evaluate the community and the level of support before adopting something that's open source.
Yeah. Dan, any thoughts there?
So I think the main word that comes to mind for me is it changes the risk in terms of, it kind of changes the perception of risk. And there's some ways I think it's useful to kind of just think about how we adapt to mitigating the different kinds of risks in those kind of situations. So typically we can count ourselves slightly safer when we're buying a thing, because we're effectively outsourcing risk for an awful lot of kind of what the software does or kind of what its impact in our stack is. And I think there's an element of that in open source as well, is it might be open source, but it might also have paid support. And how it kind of changes the risk factor of saying, well, actually, no, there's not a big community, but there may be like some commercial entity who can actually support us with that as well, which is kind of helpful. And one I think that's come up more recently, again, probably in news, and there's been kind of a couple of instances of it, so it's got a little bit more traction, a little bit more spotlight, is kind of how it changes the supply chain risk part. That kind of element of people, if it's open source, being able to kind of inject different parts into that open source project is like, who's the guardian custodian of that, and how does that fit into your risk factor of where it fits in with your stack? If it's something you can kind of turn off at the touch of a button and go, do you know what, it's not going to have any commercial impacts, this kind of thing, then maybe you play that down. Maybe it's a different thing, it's actually quite a critical part of your stack and this kind of stuff. So thinking about just how I think the open source, the benefits of open source, but also it brings a different kind of risk in different situations for me. Whilst it brings a lot of benefit, it just brings a slightly different kind of risk, and how to mitigate those, I think, is worth thinking about.
Definitely. And Omar, any thoughts on how you evaluate bringing in an open source solution to your team, your organization?
Right, yeah, and I know we went down that path so many times. Just want to make sure which one I could share. But the three things to actually keep in mind, a lot more than that, but maybe number one, Andy already covered around the maintainability support, right? So over time, how does it grow? How is support? There's also the security risk piece into that, right? So making sure that any open source that you bring into your enterprise is, fully vetted and, fully secure, that you can, leverage without creating any problem. But then also that perception of being looked at as a freeloader. I mean, we ran into those kind of issues where, we like, okay, open source, we use this because it's free of charge. And, the challenge hasn't been mostly about the cost, but the fact that it's best and it's open source and it's free that you could use. But then the question that you get was like, well, why don't we just, buy something that's more supported? We don't want to be seen as people that are just grabbing free stuff and running it through here. So those are some of the things that we deal with. It does come time when, definitely an open source solution is the best, and we just go down that path. And, currently we have a lot of those that we manage, and making sure that we work very close with our IT risk partners to vet all those things that we bring in. So.
Great. Okay, so then maybe this will be the last question, but I'm curious. Let's Sangeeta, this one. I'm curious. You have a team of engineers. You're a manager. You have your organization. How do you think about, when you look at your engineers? How do you think about whether how do you think about the makeup of your team, how that feeds into a build versus buy decision?
I think that's a great question. We touched upon this briefly earlier when we spoke about culture. And you asked about NIH, not invented here. One of the things there that I like to emphasize is, look, at the end of the day, it's the impact to the business, right? And so that's what we prioritize, and that's what we care the most about. And that may involve building cool new tech for every single thing, and that may not. But so being very clear about that, I think is important. So then when you're building your team, that's the culture. And then the other thing is, you incentivize the behavior you want to see. And so, what wins are you celebrating? Including, we touched upon sort of retiring a homegrown piece of software for, let's say, a vendor software. Well, that shouldn't be seen as a failure, or it didn't, as a negative. In fact, we celebrate those as wins. We had this great example of something where we had piñatas, and we were like, all right, we had a piñata, and things that are just, look, the value that it's provided. So incentivizing behaviors, and also acknowledging that there are some people for whom inherently it's the building that's what they're most passionate about. And so culturally being very clear, if you want to spend 60% of your time on this open source library, maybe my team isn't the team for you. I've definitely had those conversations. Reese had one recently with a candidate, right? And said, look, for me, it's a means to an end. Here's what you deliver. And as part of that, you make us more efficient. You do blah, 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 love for you to contribute. But if your driver is the other way around, then maybe my team is not for you, and being explicit, and people appreciate that.
Great. Awesome. Well, I think we will wrap up there. It is quarter to the hour, wherever you are. So thank you so much to the panel. Thank you, Andrea, Dan, Omar, Sangeeta. Really appreciate your time and your insights. To the audience, if you found this topic interesting and you want to know more about how to set up a build or a purchase solution, or the integration between the two up for success, Lead Dev will be hosting more panels on this topic on Thursday, the 24th of June. And as a great set of experienced engineering leaders will be on those panels. So please do sign up. You can sign up for information on those at leaddev.com. But yeah, thank you so much to the panel, to the audience. We're all now going to be heading over to Slack, to the building software channel in the Lead Dev Slack. So please head on over there if you'd like to continue the discussion. But thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you next time.